But I want to just basically do some reading and maybe some little commentaries along the way. So let's start with prayer. Dear Father, it's a beautiful day you blessed us with again. And it's good to be here back again with family once again. And just to study about you and the history of the church and know ourselves a little bit better, Father. I know we've had a lot of bad history, but there's a lot of interesting things that just came up that makes us who we are today and helps us to understand ourselves a little bit better, Father. And pray that you would guide us and give us the knowledge that we need to serve you better, to know you better, Father. Thank you for that ability and for blessing each one of us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right.
Talk about the intertestament before Christ. Are you talking about the 400 years?
Yes. And that's pretty much where it starts out. Well, it kind of starts out on the destruction of Israel. You know, Nebuchadnezzar and Ahasuerus and all those that came and split them all up. They took the northern Israel first and took them into captivity, and then 150, 200 years later they came and took Jerusalem. And so this is kind of where that starts in the Old Testament. And basically I'm going to read tonight. Okay? At the close of the Old Testament, Israel was a defeated nation. The kingdom had been split after the reign of Solomon, and the Assyrians had wiped out the northern kingdom of Israel in 606 BC. In 606 BC, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and carried most of the Jews back to Babylon. Every few years, he came back and destroyed the city some more and took more Jews captive. The temple was utterly destroyed. Because the temple had been destroyed, the Jews in captivity could not make proper sacrifices, and the concept of the synagogue was born out of necessity. This was the time of the lion's den and the fiery furnace. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. This is where their stories come in. Nebuchadnezzar took Jerusalem and took all them captive. The synagogues that we have to this day, this is where they began because, as it said, the temple was destroyed. That was the only place that they could make sacrifices. It wasn't you did it in your own backyard. You went to Jerusalem to the temple. And so since the temple wasn't around, they came up with the idea of the synagogue.
Is this when the 12 tribes were scattered? Out of line?
This is way after that here. This is the two tribes that were taken, Judah and Benjamin. The other 10 tribes had been taken many years before to Assyria. I think I get them backwards. I think the first one was Assyria, then they took the rest to Persia, which is today Iran.
What year BC did you say that approximately was?
606 is when Nebuchadnezzar first invaded or conquered Jerusalem. And it says he kept coming back every few years and taking more, yeah. This is probably about the time Jeremiah did his wailing and prophesying there. The dates are going to start to run together, so pay close attention to where we are, and then the names are going to start when we get into who did what and all. You got to keep track on which king was king of Syria and Egypt and Israel at the times there. In 536 BC, this is history that we all know from the Bible, the Medo-Persian Empire defeated Babylon. Cyrus, the king, immediately allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and began rebuilding the temple. The temple was completed in 522 BC, and the Levites were restored as the priestly tribe. The Medo-Persians ruled over Judea until about 334. So the temple was rebuilt in 522, and the Medo-Persians were over them until about 334. When Alexander the Great marched unopposed into Jerusalem, he had struck a deal with the high priest that if they would not fight, he would not destroy the temple or the priesthood. Alexander liked the Jews, and when he built the city of Alexandria in Egypt, he invited the Jews to move down there as his guest, and many of them did, and it was in the large Jewish community of Alexandria that the scriptures were translated into the Greek, what we call the Septuagint today. And Jesus quoted from the Septuagint. It's pretty much the Bible of their day. Alexander the Great was Greek. And, this was all prophesied by Daniel. Okay, the head of gold, the body of silver, the feet of bronze, clay, whatever.
Was that translated into Latin? Septuagint?
Greek.
Greek.
Yes. From Hebrew, I guess. Yeah. And I don't know when that came about either. Yeah, the Vulgate. Greek culture had a huge impact on the world and on Judaism in particular. Greek became the universal language. The Jewish scriptures were now accessible to Greek-speaking Jews and to the whole world. The melding of various different philosophies with Jewish theology influenced both the Jews of the first century as well as that of the early Christian church. So you've got the Jewish culture, you've got the Greek culture. Remember the Samaritans, how the Assyrians and all had conquered nations from all over the world, the world of that known in the world at that time, and moved them into Israel and back, and just shuffled people around so that nobody was pure anymore. Nobody really knew their lineage. So this is where a lot of that started. But not all the Jews welcomed the Hellenization. That means the turning the Greek, Hellenization. Not all Jews welcomed the Hellenization of Palestine. The first group to resist Hellenization was known as the Hasidim. They came together to oppose the intrusion of Greek ideas and to protect Jewish law and tradition. They later evolved into the party called the Pharisees. So this is where the Pharisees started, after everybody came back there. The Essenes were a monastic community. They lived by themselves in a commune, and that separated themselves from the contact with anything Greek or Roman in order to remain pure. They saw themselves as the only true Jews. The Essenes are famous for writing the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if I had some pictures from my trip back in 17, we can see. I can show you the cave where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that. It's interesting stuff. But that's what the Essenes they considered themselves the only pure Jews because they had nothing to do with Rome or Greek or anything like that. The Zealots called for armed resistance against the occupiers, and particularly against Rome later on. Wasn't one of our apostles a zealot? Simon? Jesus chose a zealot here that was a military guy. He was all for fighting. Yeah. The Sadducees, however, associated with the Greeks and later the Romans, and this relationship gave them political power. So we'll read about the Pharisees here in just a second, here, and the Sadducees. But yeah, the Pharisees, nothing to do with outside influence. The Sadducees welcomed them all. Whoever ruled us, we'll bow down to them. And so that's why the Sadducees came in Jesus' day. Pretty much had most of the Sanhedrin. Were rulers in the Sanhedrin because they were the rich guys. because they bowed down to whoever, or they kissed the boots of whoever ruled them. Yeah. The influence of the Greeks and the Persians before them shaped how the Jewish people saw God and led to a new theological split. The Pharisees, along with the majority of Jews, held a strong belief in spirits, both good and bad. They held a view of angels and Satan that was heavily influenced by Persian thought. They believed in the resurrection of the body and future rewards and punishment based on the keeping of the law. They believed in one God who was the creator of the world. They had a strong expectation of the coming of the Messiah. I like the Pharisees so far. Sounds good to me. I agree with everything they're going on there. They developed a body of oral law and commentary called the Talmud. The Talmud is made up of the Mishnah and the Gemara. That's where I don't necessarily agree with them. This is where Jesus says, you have your traditions. The Talmud was the traditions. They wanted to make sure that they followed God so closely that they made up all these laws. You've heard about you can't walk so many steps on the Sabbath day, and you can't carry a needle with you if you're a tailor, anything to do with work. And they just made it almost impossible to follow the law here because they were so strict. I would call them zealots myself. Maybe not militant zealots, but yeah. Then the Sadducees, here's their beliefs. The Sadducees were not devoutly religious. They saw a separation between religious life and secular life. What you did in your secular life did not necessarily impact your religious life. Oh, that's the word I was looking for. Yes, politicians. The only scripture they accepted was the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They did not accept the oral law of the Pharisees, the Talmud, which I don't either. They denied a resurrection or a personal immortality. You're not going to live forever. They did not believe in spirits or angels, and because of their willingness to cooperate with the ruling Greeks or Syrians or Romans, they held political power and were the wealthy class. The Sadducees disappeared from the world scene after Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. Okay? After the death of Alexander the Great, his empire was split up and Palestine came under control of the ruler of Egypt. Israel was forced to pay tribute or taxes to the king of Egypt each year. After a few years, the Jewish high priest quit paying the taxes to Egypt, and Egypt threatened war if the back taxes were not paid. A representative of the high priest traveled to Egypt and struck a deal with the king. He would collect the taxes from his people and deliver them to the king. He would, of course, collect more than he had agreed to and pocket the difference. Starting to sound familiar here? This was the birth of the publicans or the tax collectors. Again, another apostle, a tax collector. Jesus really knew how to pick them, didn't he?
Did they all believe in the Mishnah? Practice that?
The Pharisees? Yeah.
No, the Sadducees.
No. The Sadducees.
That had a lot of agriculture.
Agriculture?
Yeah. Plant. So it's
yeah. No, the Sadducees didn't have anything to do with religion. They were strictly politicians.
They didn't believe in the Torah either?
The Torah, yes.
Well, that's the first 5 books.
That is true. I don't know how they separated but religion and secular life, they didn't mix. Yeah. You did what you wanted all the rest of the week, and on Sunday you probably, in modern language, on Sunday you were holy. On the rest of the week here, you did what you wanted. That's the way it is now. No, in a majority of the world, yes. Yeah.
You know, in New York City, got a building. Can't go in. Sunday, the elevator is automatically stops it. Because they say if
18, 19, or 20.
well, I mean, you can't punch any floor you want to go to.
Oh, so you have to walk up the stairs?
No, the elevator goes, but it stops at every floor. You have to stop it 18 times before you get home.
Really? Okay.
I mean, that's the way it is.
That sounds like we're getting into the Pharisees now.
No, that's the way it is with the Jews in New York City. Right.
Right. The Pharisaical type Jews. Right. Let's see. Okay, Alexander the Great has died. Egypt ruling Israel. For the next 150 years, Syria and Egypt were almost in constant war with each other. I can't see. Is Syria up there? You got the Sea of Galilee. Syria is up north. You got Israel down below, and then down in Africa, northern Africa, you've got Egypt. So Israel is between Syria and Egypt. Syria and Egypt are constantly fighting, and a good place to fight is right in the middle. Still today, yes. And plus you've got Jordan on the east side, yeah. For the next 150 years, Syria and Egypt were almost in constant war with each other. Because Palestine was in between the two, a lot of fighting took place there. We already said that. Jerusalem was overrun time and time again. By the time of Christ, the city had been sacked 27 times. The Jews continued to be persecuted by the Egyptians and Syrians until it reached a low point in 175 BC. All right, this is where it gets interesting and confusing here, so pay attention. Antiochus Epiphanes, who had been written about in the book of Daniel, was king of Syria. Okay, this is the Syrian king up north. Antiochus Epiphanes. He had been mayor of Athens and was steeped in Greek culture. He invaded Jerusalem and set about Hellenizing, or making Greek, the Jews. The Sadducees welcomed the changes and even helped the process along. Yeah, the Sadducees, they'll go along with anybody. Many Jews took Greek names. The Pharisees and the high priest Onias III rallied the conservative population against the Syrians. This angered the king, Epiphanes. He responded by vowing to smash the conservative Jews and by selling the office of the high priest to the highest bidder. Jason, a Sadducee and the leader of the pro-Hellenization group, was made high priest. So Jason bought the high priesthood from King Epiphanes of Syria. Jason, after a year, Epiphanes sold the priesthood to Menelaus. So just whatever mood that Epiphanes is in, he followed. Yeah. Who was Menelaus was not even a Levite. Does that mean that Jason was a Levite? I don't know. But Menelaus was not a Levite. Who the only ones allowed to be priests are Levites, right? Right. This made almost everyone mad, and he posted the Syrian army in Jerusalem to enforce the appointment. In 168 BC, Epiphanes had to go down to Egypt to fight the Egyptians. A rumor circulated in Palestine that he had been killed in battle, and there was dancing in the streets. When he heard that about the Jews' celebration, he came back to Jerusalem. You turn around, you're dancing around here, and you turn around, and oops, there's the guy that we're dancing here because he's dead here. Knowing the Jews would not fight on the Sabbath, he entered the city on the Sabbath and slaughtered thousands. He captured 40,000 and sent them into exile. He stepped up the Hellenization program and decreed that everyone must worship Jupiter. I guess, is Jupiter the same as Zeus? Is Jupiter the Roman head god? Does anybody remember? I think Jupiter and Zeus are the same. One's Roman and one's Greek. He set up a statue of Jupiter on the altar of the temple. He then sacrificed a pig on the altar. We've all heard that story about someone sacrificing the pig in the altar, on the altar. That was Epiphanes. And sprinkled the blood throughout the temple. Epiphanes' soldiers had drunken orgies in the temple court while worshiping their god Bacchus, the Greek god of wine. The Jews were forced to watch and even participate. The Jews understood this desecration of the temple as the abomination that brings desolation. Okay, this is the prophecy fulfilled in their eyes, which had been prophesied in Daniel 11:31. Circumcision was outlawed, as well as the Sabbath and all Jewish feast days. Men were killed for refusing to eat pork. Both a mother and child were killed if a baby boy was circumcised. The scriptures were outlawed and destroyed. Sounds like we're trying to get back to that, doesn't it, these days? The oppression became intolerable. In 167 BC, Mattathias, a devout Jew, led a rebellion against the Syrians. He had 5 sons, and they became known as the Maccabees, which means the hammer of God. Their name wasn't Judas Maccabee, as we'll learn later. They were called the Maccabees, which means hammer of God. They went across the country, inspiring the women and circumcising the men. Mattathias died shortly after the rebellion began, and his son Judas took over. God was with Judas. His small army prayed and fasted before each battle. Judas defeated the Syrians in every battle, sometimes in miraculous fashion. In 165 BC, the Syrians went home to lick their wounds, and Judas returned to Jerusalem to find it in ruins. He rebuilt the temple. Now that's one I don't remember, is rebuilding the temple then. I knew Herod rebuilt it later on, but I didn't know that Judas Maccabees rebuilt it. He rebuilt the temple, and on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, or December 25th, he began an 8-day feast of dedication, or Hanukkah. It is mentioned in John 10:22 that Jesus was in Jerusalem on at least one occasion during this feast, the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah. The Jews enjoyed a period of peace, but just like in the Old Testament, they could not stay faithful for long. That's one thing I hate reading about the Old Testament is the judges. They're good for a while, then they get bad here, and then they get conquered. God sends somebody to conquer them, and they get good again here. So same thing happened between the testaments here. When the oppression let up, they lost focus on God. Judas began thinking that he had been lucky to fend off the attacks of the Egyptians and Syrians, and pursued an alliance with the up-and-coming Romans. The Romans were not much help. In 162 BC, a new leader, Demetrius, became king of Syria,
and made it known that he was going to overrun Jerusalem again. An evil Jew named Alcimus went to Demetrius and bought the office of high priest. He told lies about Judas Maccabee to the king and convinced him to attack. Alcimus wanted the Maccabees and the conservative Jews out of the way so he could take over. So the Syrians attacked Jerusalem with the Jews' own high priest leading the way. Judas could only muster 3,000 troops against the 22,000 invaders, and many of his troops lost faith and ran away. Judas was killed, and the Syrians once again sacked the city. Back and forth and back and forth. This sounds like Judges all over again. Jonathan Maccabee took over after the death of his brother. He rallied the conservative Jews against the high priest and the pro-Syrian Jews in a Jewish civil war. Jonathan was killed, and the last of the Maccabee brothers, Simon, took over. I only counted 4 brothers. In Syria, a power struggle was taking place between 2 rivals for the throne. Simon backed the right guy and became high priest as a result. Now, I don't know if the Maccabees were Levites or not, but he became the high priest. Simon renewed the alliance with Rome in 143 BC. This meant that Israel was at peace for the first time in a while. This inspired the Hebrews to confer the office of high priest to Simon and his heirs forever. Remember, Simon was not a Levite. In fact, the Levites had not sided with the Maccabees when they began the revolt, and most had fled to Egypt. Okay, so we're still not following the law. Peace did not last. Simon was killed by his son-in-law, and now the punctuation on this is, I'm not sure who is. Simon was killed by his son-in-law, and his son, John Hyrcanus, became high priest. So was it Simon's son-in-law, John Hyrcanus? I don't know. Or was it Anyway, Simon's dead. Got a new high priest called John Hyrcanus. You could call Hyrcanus a non-practicing Pharisee. Remember, the Pharisees are the religious ones here. He actually became a Sadducee and continued to defile the temple and fight with the Pharisees. As a final insult to the Pharisees, he named his wife as his successor. She does not last long because her son, Aristobulus, kills her and becomes the high priest. He gives himself the title King of the Jews. The priests of the Hasmonean dynasty, or the Maccabee dynasty, continued to kill each other off and do battle with the Syrians and Egyptians. So you don't only watch both sides here, you got to watch your back too. Yeah. Finally, in 63 BC, the Romans, with whom they had a treaty, decided to put an end to the chaos and marched on Jerusalem. Israel had been an independent nation throughout the Hasmonean dynasty for about 100 years, and they would not be independent again until, does anybody know that date? 1948. Our generation. Yeah. So somebody has ruled over Israel until 1948, from this period, 63 BC. Palestine was ruled over by a list of Romans, including Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. I always thought there was an H in there, Anthony, but it's Antony. It was Mark Antony that appointed Herod the Great as Tetrarch of Judea in 42 BC. Herod was an Edomite. Who are the Edomites? Esau. Jacob. No. Isaac's. Yeah, Jacob was his brother. Isaac's first son. Yeah. They were twins, though, weren't they? Firstborn. Herod was an Edomite, a descendant of Esau. This meant he was a Hebrew, but not an Israelite. When John Hyrcanus was high priest, he had forced the Edomites to convert to Judaism under penalty of death. Herod was considered a Jew by the Romans. Some of them, I guess. Oh, well, by the Romans, yes. But not all the Jews. The Jews, however, rejected him and hated having what they considered a non-Jew as their king. Herod reigned from 37 BC to 4 BC. He built Caesarea or Caesarea. I was told when I was in Israel it's pronounced Caesarea in honor of Caesar. And I always called it Caesarea. But apparently it's Caesarea. He built Caesarea and Masada, but his greatest project was rebuilding the temple. All that remains today of Herod's temple is the western wall, or called the Wailing Wall. Herod, I wish I had pictures of all that here. I've got pictures of all these things, of Masada, the Wailing Wall. Herod the Great was nuts and killed any rabbi. Herod the Great was nuts and killed any rabbi that he saw as a threat or that stood in the way of his dragging the Jews into the modern world through Hellenization. He also killed his wife and some of his sons. Yeah. Talk about that Wailing Wall. One thing I remembered was that there was a little metal barricade, movable little metal barricades here, that kind of divided the wall in half. And one of our ladies in our group was walking up to the wall, and all of a sudden she got mobbed by a bunch of Jews, I guess. And they said, "You can't be there." She's a woman. They've got that barrier there. The women have to go on this side of the barrier while the men were on this side. The men have a real big area here, and the women have a little spot over here. But they nabbed her fast when she even got halfway up to the wall. Herod Antipas took over after his father's death. Now, when Herod died, actually, that whole Palestine area was divided into 4. That's not in my book here, but that's what I remember from history, is that he had the 4 sons that it was divided, or 3 sons and another that it was divided up in. But Herod Antipas took over the Jerusalem area. He took over in 4 BC and ruled until 39 BC. He was the Herod that married his sister-in-law and had John the Baptist killed. He was also the Herod involved in the crucifixion of Jesus, Herod Antipas. Herod the Great was his daddy. Herod Antipas crucified Jesus. Herod Agrippa was appointed to his father's post, so his son was Herod Agrippa. Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa. Keep all those straight. Was appointed to his father's post by Emperor Caligula and served from 41 to 44 AD. He made himself popular with the Jews by defending Jewish customs and traditions. He persecuted the early Christian church and arrested Peter and John and beheaded James. Herod Agrippa II became king in 48 AD. In about 58 AD, Paul was able to preach the gospel to both Herod and Governor Festus. That's in Acts. We read about that in Acts. While on his way to Rome for trial. Herod Agrippa II died in about 100 AD and was the last king of the Jews. Then it has some writings it lists the apocryphal writings that came in this period, but I won't mention them here. How are we doing on time? What time is it? Oh, okay. Yes.
They refer Okay.
Okay, would that be in one of the apocryphal books? I want to read those one of these days
It's in
here.
the book of
In the Book of Mormon? Really?
Bible, right?
Okay, okay. But there are 4 books of the Maccabees in the Apocrypha. And one of these days I'll read those here and see what they have to say. Now this is tradition about what happened to the apostles after Acts, I guess. Because other than Peter and Paul, we don't really know much about where everybody went here. But this is traditional stuff here. It's not in the Bible, so take it or leave it. The close of the first century saw the close of the apostolic age of the church. Many of the apostles left Jerusalem during the persecution that began with the stoning of Stephen. Tradition has it that all of the apostles were gone from Jerusalem 12 years after the crucifixion. Many went to spread the gospel first in Judea, then Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth, as Jesus told them. We are told in Acts that James, the son of Zebedee, was executed by Herod. Which Herod? Very good. Y'all are not sleeping on me. In 44 AD. In about 44 AD. Acts also records some of Paul's journeys. It is believed that he was beheaded in Rome under Nero's persecution in about 64 AD. Paul, because he was a Roman citizen, Paul would have been given this more humane execution. You don't have to feel the ouch all the time here. I always wonder that if you cut off your head here, do you feel anything?
Not for long.
Not for long. So Peter was considered the founding bishop or elder of the church in Rome, and he too was martyred in his persecution. Tradition tells us that at his request, he was crucified upside down because he did not feel he deserved to be killed in the same manner as his Savior. I've heard that one before here. It seems like somebody was crucified on an X cross or something like that, or maybe that was Peter's also, but upside down. Thomas traveled to the east and established the church in India. The Indian church existed in isolation until medieval missionaries came into the area and found a healthy church already in existence. The Marthoma Christians, who are today in southern India, near Madras and in the western part of India, still claim a lineage back to St. Thomas. Tradition says that Thomas made it all the way to China, where he established a small Christian community that lasted about 200 years before dying out. He was speared to death in India by 4 soldiers. Andrew traveled north and east into the Baltic states, the Russian Orthodox, the Serbian Orthodox, and others in the area considered him their founding apostle. He also preached in what is modern-day Turkey and Greece, where he was crucified. Philip went to North Africa, where he established the church in Carthage. He later went to Asia Minor, which is Turkey, where he converted a Roman proconsul's wife, and in retaliation, the proconsul had him killed. Matthew ministered in Persia, or Iran, and Ethiopia. It is thought that he was stabbed to death while in Ethiopia. Bartholomew is believed to have traveled to India with Thomas, and then he came back to Armenia. Just a side note here. When I was in Jerusalem, the city is divided into 4 sections. And you've got the Christians section, the Muslim section, the Jewish section, and the Armenian section. And I've never quite understood the Armenian history here. But apparently Thomas, or Bartholomew, went back to Armenia to preach. It is also claimed that Bartholomew preached in Ethiopia and southern Arabia, and there's a lot of various stories about how he died as a martyr. James, the son of Alphaeus, ministered in Syria. The historian Josephus claims that he was stoned and clubbed to death there in Syria. Simon the Zealot preached in Persia, Iran, where he was killed after refusing to make a sacrifice to the sun god. Matthias, the one who replaced Judas, was said to minister with Andrew, and he was burned to death. Tradition has it that John was the only apostle to die a natural death. He was the bishop of Ephesus, or elder of Ephesus, I guess, and where it is said that he took Mary, the mother of Jesus, into his home and took care of her until her death. During the persecution of Domitian in the mid-90s, he was exiled to the island of Patmos, where as an old man, it was believed that he wrote the book of Revelation in his 90s. Yeah.
On how
It is,
what about that guy?
yeah. It,
He's living
right. Yeah, that's hard to understand what Jesus was saying right there. but yeah, that we get an idea that something different's in store for John. Yeah. The persecution of the church. This period saw the beginning of persecution in the church by Rome. It was also the acknowledgement of it also saw the acknowledgement of Christianity as a religion separate from Judaism. The relationship that the Jews and the Christian church, the relationship between the Jews and the Christian church began to dissolve, and in the later half of the first century, the persecution at the hand of the Jews that we saw in the New Testament continued after the close of the New Testament. The Jews had been run out of Rome on more than one occasion due to riots that developed between the Jews and the Christians. As the Romans prepared to destroy Jerusalem in 70 AD to put down a Jewish revolt, many in the Christian community fled to Pella in response to a prophetic warning. Although they shared this warning with their Jewish neighbors, they were seen as traitors and cowards who had abandoned their loved ones and in their time of need. In 70 AD, that's where Masada comes in. Maybe if I do this again, I'll bring some of these pictures here and figure out how to put them up on the PowerPoint so you can see all these areas here. As far as from what I've read in the Bible, I can assume that John was the only apostle at the crucifixion. Yeah, and Jesus directly told him, "Take care of Mom." Yeah. And he did, apparently, according to tradition. The Jews had enjoyed special treatment from the Romans because the Jews had been such a stubborn and independent people. Rome allowed them more autonomy than most others. They were even exempt from emperor worship. That's a big thing. As a sect of Judaism, the Christians also enjoyed this same protection. Unrest between Jews and Christians threatened this special status and led to a crackdown by Rome. The Jews blamed the Christians and made it clear that they did not consider Christians to be part of Judaism, as it began to be seen as just another religion in the empire. Christians lost the protection that they had once had and now became a target of Roman aggression. Why did the Romans persecute Christians? Christians of this period were seen as strange and scary people. They held secret meetings, and they drank the blood and ate the flesh of their leader. Their rejection of local pagan gods made them social outcasts. They refused to participate in festivals where the gods might be praised or appeased. They refused invitations to dinner because of the offerings and prayers that would take place during the meal. They even refused to enjoy an action-packed day at the gladiatorial games. Their rejection of idolatry made it hard for them to hold down a job because nearly all buildings were dedicated to a heathen god. Christian masons and carpenters found little work because textbooks were so laden with pagan doctrine. Christians were not school teachers, nor did they attend Roman schools. This is hitting pretty close to home. Christian tradesmen like tailors and metal workers refused to make items that would be used in pagan rituals. Christians were a weird and scary people. The Christian social ethic was also vastly different. In the Roman world, slaves were at the mercy of their masters. If they did not meet his every requirement, they would be discarded or even slaughtered. Weak or unwanted babies were exposed. On the other hand, slaves had the same rights within the church as anyone else. In parentheses, Callistus, an early bishop of Rome, was himself a slave. Christians valued human life and held a high view on sex and marriage. Christians were the object of fear and scorn by many Romans. Their lifestyle itself was a rejection of the gods and might even draw the ire of an offended god who would bring about a famine or pestilence. So that's another reason why the Romans didn't like them. They're afraid their gods would be offended. Their first Roman persecution began in 64 AD when Rome burned while Nero fiddled. When a rumor spread that Nero had himself caused the fire, he blamed the Christians. And a persecution broke out all over the empire as Rome now had an excuse to stamp out Christianity. This is the persecution under which both Peter and Paul were martyred in Rome. In 68 AD, a Jewish revolt against the Romans began in Jerusalem. James, the brother of Jesus and first bishop or elder of Jerusalem, was martyred. That's in Acts also, is James being killed. Rome destroyed the city in 70 AD. That's a whole other story. I don't know if that's in this book or not here, but there's a lot of history that's recorded about that. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in particular had a major impact on Judaism. All the records and genealogies had been destroyed. That's a big thing today. If the Orthodox Jews are still expecting a Messiah, it has to be able to trace back to David. And there are no genealogies these days going back that far. They were all destroyed. So how are we going to prove the new Messiah here if he comes? The high priesthood ceased to exist. The Sadducees were never heard of again. Remember, 70 AD, the Sadducees became extinct. Jews fled to the ends of the earth. The destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD and again in 135 AD also impacted in Christianity. It had been the seat of the church. The apostles operated out of there. It was the source of doctrine and inspiration, although the church in Jerusalem continued to be held in high esteem, and its bishop was counted as one of the patriarchs. It never recovered the influence it once had. Doing on time. Can't see that. What's that? 15 till. Is that about it? Or we go? Yeah, that's a good place to stop. Huh?
It's up to you. That's where
How are we doing? Is this stuff interesting enough to keep going? Jody?
That Judas that you mentioned earlier, could that be?
Leading a rebellion? But, let me see if I don't think the dates are going to match up real well on that.
No, we don't.
Yeah, no, I think the Maccabees were a little bit before that time there, so maybe not.
Who are we talking about?
Oh, yeah.
When they were over.
No, I think that was closer to Jesus' time. So no, the Maccabees were in about 160 BC. So unless he was a couple hundred years old, I don't think it was the same Judas. That's my opinion. The next section is on Gnosticism. Actually, I'll just finish up this. We've got one page to go here. The battle with the Gnostics. Gnosticism comes from the Greek gnosis, meaning knowledge or to know. It was believed that God was this supreme knowledge and that this secret knowledge had been imparted to just a few select humans. The pursuit of this knowledge was a goal. God was not a personal God, and God per se was something more like the Force in Star Wars. Right? Gnosticism was not, however, just one group or movement, but an amalgamation of many different beliefs with the same central ideas of this divine knowledge and the concept of dualism. The universe is a struggle between the forces of good and evil. Good is associated with the spiritual, while the flesh is considered evil. Christian Gnostics believe that God had given this special secret knowledge to Jesus, who had passed it down to the apostles, and therefore they believed that for any teaching to have value, it must be traced back through the apostles. And this is why it became important for churches to be able to say that they were founded by an apostle. Both John and Paul battled Gnostic thought in their writings. Reading the first verses of John 1, of 1 John. Gnosticism was heretical due to several issues. The most obvious was its problem with the incarnation of Christ. Because the flesh was evil and the spirit was good, God could not have become flesh. We just participated in communion today here and celebrated that flesh that he took on. Jesus could not be both man and God. He was either a man who may have received some special knowledge or a spirit that just appeared to be a man. Gnostics did not believe that in God as the creator. God would not lower himself to creating matter. Makes sense to me. If it's evil. God projected himself in several emanations like sunbeams, each less powerful and less pure, until finally matter was created by some lower emanation. So God created something that created something else that created something else, created a sunbeam, and the sunbeam created man. Gnosticism showed itself in other ways too. Because flesh is evil, many Gnostic Christians, get that sounds like an oxymoron, Gnostic Christian, pursued an ascetic lifestyle in an attempt to deny all fleshly desire. Do not taste, do not touch. Where we hear that, you've heard, you live by the do not taste. Is that in Colossians? Because of the separation between spirit and flesh, Others indulged in fleshly desires, thinking it would have no impact on the spiritual. Okay? The battle with the Gnostics led to the development of a creed or statement of belief designed to define orthodox doctrine. Orthodox meaning continuing true and accepted doctrine, as opposed to heretical or false doctrine. The creed of the Orthodox Church changed over the years as the church dealt with various theological issues. I guess here's where that Catholic that Dick is talking about kind of comes in here. Universal Church. The first creed of the church has been called the Apostles' Creed, and it was not written by the apostles. However, but that name was given in order to give it authority. It is safe to say that it did, in fact, contain the viewpoints held by the apostles. It is thought that the Apostles' Creed was adapted in part from a commonly used statement of belief that was used by converts in the first century before their baptism. Remember that when the Apostles' Creed was written, the New Testament canon had not yet been compiled, and there was a real need for a concise statement of basic Christian theology. I just thought that would been a hard time to live here before the New Testament was together. After Christ's crucifixion and that time here, I guess Paul said in Corinthians 13, when the perfect comes, the imperfect will disappear. Gnostic tendencies continue to exist in the church today. The belief that salvation can be assured through a supernatural imparting of grace with no corresponding change in lifestyle is an example of Gnosticism. This would be a Catholic who thinks that he can be as wild as he wants as long as he receives the grace that is magically imparted through the sacrament of communion. Did y'all hear the news a week or two ago here that the Catholic Church was talking about not allowing President Biden to participate in communion because of because he supports abortion? And he turned around and said, "It's none of your business what I believe." So apparently, for a Catholic, not having communion is not being able to get rid of your sins. So that was apparently a big deal. It's a big deal. Let's see. It would be a Baptist who misunderstands Calvin's doctrine of the perseverance of the saints, once saved, always saved, as a license to sin at will. Yeah, I've always thought that. Once saved, always saved. Do what you want. And I asked my Baptist friend that I grew up with here about that, and he says, well, they were never saved in the first place. Their heart was never there in the first place. Yeah. As a license, because he at one point in his life had placed his faith in Christ. It could be a member of the Church of Christ who feels his ticket is punched no matter how he conducts his life because he is a member of the right church with the right doctrine and the right practices. Any Christian who sees a separation between their religious life and their secular life is in danger of Gnosticism. What you do on Sunday should have an effect on what takes place on Monday. Christian Scientists are modern-day Gnostics. Is Christian Scientists a thing these days? They were when I was a kid, but I haven't heard of any in many years. Does anybody know any Christian Scientists? Or are there any churches around here that anybody knows about? Heard of them. There was one down the street from me in Tulsa when I lived in Tulsa. Yeah. Take them to the emergency room or whatever, or have a surgery. Yeah. And that's one of the things, that's the only thing I can think of when they talk about reason for not taking the shot is on religious grounds here. I immediately thought of the Christian Scientist. Yeah. They believe the spiritual world is the only reality, and that the physical is all an illusion. Sickness is merely a lack of faith and a loss of focus on the spiritual. Some in the that's period, end of thought. Some in the name it, claim it movement are Gnostics, in that they believe that there are certain words or phrases that can be mined out of the scriptures that can be used to bind God to certain things, like making us rich. That's the end of that chapter. Sounds like a good place to stop there. Some more really interesting stuff here. We get into the monasteries and the Nicene period, the Nicene Council. So there's a lot of good stuff. So if Dick takes a vacation again here, I'll continue on. Does anybody need to partake of communion tonight? Hands? Okay. How are we going to close this out? Yeah. Okay. Roy, you help me out there?
9:12 for a song of invitation. If anyone needs to come forward this time, we'll stand and sing. 9:12. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Days are filled with woe and care. Hearts are lonely and drear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Calvary, Calvary. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the beautiful day of life you blessed each of us with. Thankful to come together today and worship you in spirit and truth. We're so thankful for this class this evening, and thankful for everyone here. Appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for Jesus' great sacrifice. Remember him as part of his name that we pray.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.